people didn't have to know what it was about necessarily. They could hear the music, Dark Child sings. Yeah, they could hear the music, but they wouldn't really know the backstory. So it really did become a voice and a place of refuge for me.
Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more month than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident.
Good day, and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Tina Davidson. Tina is a highly regarded American composer, creates music that stands out for its emotional depth and lyrical dignity. Lauded for her authentic voice, the New York Times has praised her vivid ear for harmony and colors. Opera News describes Tina Davidson's music as transfigured beauty, and the Philadelphia Inquirer writes that she writes real music with structure, mood, novelty, and harmonic sophistication, with haunting melodies that grow out of complex, repetitive rhythms. Tina's music can be heard on Albany Records, CRI, Callisto, and Opus One, to name a few labels that carry her music. Her memoir, Let Your Heart Be Broken, Life in Music from a Classical Composer, is now available from Boyle and Dalton. Her memoir traces her extraordinary life in equally lyrical language, juxtaposing memories, journal entries, notes on compositions in progress, and insights into the life of an artist and a mother at work. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Tina. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for giving me some of your time and investing in my listeners and myself. So one of the things I had mentioned before I hit recorders, and for the new listeners or people watching, I focus on the origin story, and I do that so that we can connect with Tina from her earliest recollections to where she is today, because I honestly believe without vulnerability and without some sort of connection through a person's origin of what they've gone through, it's hard for people to really connect, and it's really superficial. So I'd appreciate it, Tina, if you could share with me your origin story from your earliest recollections to where you are today currently.
Well, and it is quite a bit of part of my book. My memoir is my origin story. So briefly, I was 6 months old when I was put into a foster home. I was born in Sweden, in Stockholm, and I was put in foster home with the Elmstos, with Solveig and Torsten, for my mother and father. And I had 3 brothers. The youngest of those 3 was almost my age. So we were kind of brought up as twins, Kjell Olaf and myself. I was put there when I was 6 months old and lived there for 3 years. And the way I tell the story, one day a beautiful American professor came to visit, and she stayed in the neighborhood for a month or so, and then she adopted me and left with me and brought me to America. She married, and I became the oldest of 5. I always held this idea of being adopted privately. My mother seemed very reluctant to talk to me about it. And she never treated me any differently than her other children. I was always one of the family, but I always felt different, detached, like I didn't really belong, or I didn't have a lot of trust in what belonging meant, because, I was placed in one situation. I was in one situation when I was born, and 6 months later I was put with his family, and then when I was 3.5, I was put in another situation. And I often fantasized or was scared of that somebody might come and take me away from this family as well. It never felt secure, even though my mother never distinguished, her care for me. My stepfather definitely treated me differently than his biological children. But I always had sort of strange visual memories of my time in Sweden. But basically, it was sort of like, it felt like it was dark until I was 3.5, and suddenly it was light when I came to America. So when I was in college, I got a job in the summer when I was 21 to take care of a daughter of a family friend who happened to be sending her to Sweden. And so I was to live with her in Sweden and learn some Swedish, connect with my birthplace, and stay with her for a couple of months. And right at the end of it, I decided I would try to find out who my birth parents were. And I don't have dark hair right now, but I used to have very black hair. And I didn't, it didn't occur to me that, Swedes are really blonde. And I had this dark hair. But anyway, I imagined that I had Swedish parents, and it seemed very exciting. So I called up the Swedish adoption agency, and at first they said, "Oh no, we wouldn't have any information from you." I had always assumed I was Swedish. And again, I never talked to my mother about it, because it was clear when I brought it up, she just didn't deflect it. She was not going to talk about this. So then I called the American embassy, and they said, "Oh, we probably don't have any records either. It was such a long time ago." So finally, the day before I left for Sweden, back to the US, I called the Swedish adoption agency again, and they said, "Oh, thank God you called again. We're always supposed to take a phone number, but we just didn't think we had any information about you, because you're not, if you're an American citizen, you wouldn't be, we don't adopt Swedish children out." So that's, they said, "Come down, we have information." And I just remember the picture of her sort of sitting in this dark office with this little light on, and she had a piece of paper, and she said, "Oh, this is a letter from your birth mother." And I found out that my adopted mother was actually my birth mother, that I had been living with my adopted mother, my birth mother this entire time. So that was quite a turnaround, to think that I had thought of myself as adopted and been very disconnected, when in fact it was this word that wasn't true, but had shaped my reality. I for all intents and purposes, yes, she came back and took me, and maybe even filled out some forms, but she was my birth mother. So I did go back, and a week later, talked to her, sit down and talk to her, and she cried. She said, "Oh yeah, I intended to tell you, but this really isn't your story. This is my story." And I said, "Well, who else knows?" And she said, "Nobody." She had never told my stepfather. Certainly my siblings thought I was adopted. So it was a very long negotiation with her to work out, sort of coming out and actually representing myself as her daughter to other people. And I want to say, in my mother's defense, having an illegitimate child in the 50s was a real strike against women. the world was not kind to women who had illegitimate children. She was getting her PhD, which was very unusual for someone in the early 50s to have. And she was genuinely worried about securing her job and securing her ability to take care of me. So it was a very smart plan, to bring me back as this adopted child. I write in my memoir that there is such a difference between privacy and secrets. You're entitled to privacy. But if you have a secret about somebody else, and you have to be careful about sometimes divulging a secret to somebody else, but in this case, the secret really was about me. And it was very hurtful that she had not, maybe when I was a teenager, said, "Hey, honey, let's go and talk. Maybe we can't talk about this to everybody, but I want you to know that you're my daughter. You're my biological daughter. I love you. I've always wanted you." But the secret disconnected me from that.
Well, secrets eat us alive, though. Like, honestly, I understand where you're coming from, but your mother was living a mental form of hell because she was hiding something. I know secrets are damning to our health, right? It's just, I can't even imagine. I'm not defending her, but that choice would have been so much better for her to have talked to you as a teenager or even earlier. I'm familiar with people that have waited until their kids were in their mid-20s to tell them they were adopted, and the shock and awe and the disconnection and secrets. People always justify secrets, so don't they?
Yes, they do. I'm just seeing if I can find the chapter that I write about. If truth be told, that's a chapter called "If Truth Be Told." And I think you're so right when you talk about the power of secrets and how they what had my mother been thinking? Did she wish to protect herself and me? Life in the 50s was not kind to women. She could have possibly forfeited her job, reputation, and ability to care for me. Or perhaps she thought this secret was private and that privacy didn't include me. The difference, however, in between private and secret is worlds apart. We are all entitled to privacy, but a secret, a small untruth, even for the best reason, begins to have a life of its own. It becomes a monster, a personal Frankenstein with no conscience. He runs amok, clacking and clanging in everybody's closet, slowly seeping upward like bad groundwater. He poisons the well. Then returning again and again, he binds you in a straitjacket of your own devising. You are imprisoned.
That is, wow, great words. You're good at you're a good speaker, though, obviously, too. So I could feel that as you were saying every word. So I appreciate you sharing that. Definitely we'll talk more about your book as well as we proceed. But yeah, secrets they're really toxic. And I've seen it throughout my life. All of a sudden people will share something. Sometimes, have you found, though, like even people that I always tell people that your closest people, your spouse, even your significant other, your friends of 25, 30 years, all of a sudden you'll find out things about them, or they'll share things that they were living a facade in your presence all the time. And they had secrets that were eating them alive. And I see all of a sudden a connection to people when they share secrets to me that they've intentionally kept because that's, they want to do that. That's their choice. That literally I watched our communication change. Sometimes it's to the bad because the secret isn't good. Sometimes it's a secret because they just were ashamed or whatever the case may be. I see their mannerisms, their body language, their tonality, everything about them shifts. Did you find that with your mother and you when that secret came out?
Well, as I wrote, he becomes this Frankenstein, this almost imprisoning you. I think having kept that secret so long, and having sort of shaped her life around it, I don't think she could really ever get away from the secret. And she started to be angry at me, and certainly I was angry at her. For instance, when I got married, when I was in my 30s, I was at that time also connected to my biological father's family. I wanted to bring everybody together in my wedding, and she wanted me to have 2 weddings. I think she carried a lot of shame. I think she carried a lot of shame about having an illegitimate child. No. She didn't have shame about having an illegitimate child, but she didn't want people, she was ashamed of what people might think of her in her.
She was afraid of judgment.
Yes. And she was a wonderful teacher. She was a wonderful professor. She taught all her life. And she didn't want any cracks in the veneer. And
but she made it all about her. She made it all about her. And isn't that the case of how secrets happen and why they're devastating in the long run? It's because people are always in self-protection mode. They're not thinking about the good of others, right? And it doesn't make them bad people. It doesn't make your mom a bad person. But what it does is just defines the fact that secrets and people, like you said, cracking the veneer. What a great way to put it.
Yeah. And I think it was, it always brought me to sadness, ultimately, once I got past my anger at her, that, she had made a choice that made sense back then, but as you move forward in life, it just was so damaging. And it damaged all my brothers and sisters. It wasn't just damaging to me. It sort of seeped into every place. When I say bad groundwater, it just pollutes, just seeping up little bits. And it was a great lesson to me about how I wanted to live my life, and wanted to have not only be honest, but to have emotional honesty as well. And that's hard sometimes to be, because you have to accept that you may be vulnerable, that if you're emotionally honest with someone, they may not like you. But I do think that that's the artistic endeavor. In music, when I'm writing, for me, the way I compose, it's about really heaving my heart into my mouth. And that has to be an act of honesty, where I am, the good, bad, and the ugly. And, when you put something out there as an artist, you're always going to risk that people are not going to like it. That's always the risk. And it doesn't make it any easier to not be accepted for your artwork, but that's part of the artistic process.
Well, even you talking to me, you writing the book, you're being vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there for, unfortunately, judgment. And really, at the end of the day, in life, we should always be focused on a tribe of people in our life that are like, the saying goes, like attracts like. And your music's going to attract those that really enjoy it, connect to the emotional part of who you are through your music, whether, that's a good feeling, a bad feeling, it's a feeling. And we can't please everybody. We spend our whole lives trying to please everybody, worrying about, like your mother, judgment, when in reality, we don't need a big circle. A small circle of people that appreciate who we are. And then if we have a large body of people that appreciate our work, like your memoir or your music, that's like cherry on the top of a sundae, in my opinion.
One of the things I wanted to add to is that a lot of my memoir is, well, let me just backstory it a little bit. It's a chapter of a short story about my life, and then the next chapter is always journals, which is about in my adulthood, when I'm actually learning more things about my origin story, and I'm writing music, and my origin story is seeping into my music. So when we were talking about emotional honesty, as an artist, I actually have always written about my life. I always feel that I really only know what I am. I can only write out of myself. So as I was in my 30s and starting to really investigate my foster family more and try to understand more of my birth story, I was also writing music about it. So, for instance, I have a cello quartet called Dark Child Sings. And it is about that dark child that was kind of left in Sweden, that very dark, quiet part of myself that I think held a lot of the sadness for me. And this piece is about this child trying to find their voice. And it's first kind of, I don't want to say sad, but melancholy. And then it grows in energy like any child would. And another thing I want to say that really shaped my origin story that I didn't understand until really my daughter was born and I started to connect with myself as a child. When I left Sweden at 3.5, it was as if my family got into a car and it had a terrible accident and they were all killed. That was the effect, the loss for me, is that they disappeared. And I had no language to talk about it. I had no way of communicating that terrible loss. And I just kind of walled it up. And that was kind of the dark child. The dark child held all of that sadness. And it wasn't until I really started to go back and do therapy and really think about it and write about it, and even go to Sweden a couple of times, that I realized that all that grief was kind of waiting for me. The grief had also been encapsulated. And I went through a couple of years of grieving this loss of my Solveig.
Yeah, of course you would. It's the thing is throughout our lives, from our earliest memories, as you mentioned, origin, our mind is a giant computer that literally
Yes.
knows how to protect us when we don't realize how to protect us. It compartmentalizes stuff. We can intentionally do it, but sometimes it's unintentional. And when things start to sprout up or grow out of what's been compartmentalized and hidden, we connect in different ways. For you, it was music. It was a very profound thing for you. And as you mentioned, your music starts and then it builds and grows. That's what memories can be like. Things that we have hidden or don't want to acknowledge. This journey of music for you, though, has been really cathartic and healing.
And it's so interesting talking about writing the book is one thing, writing about my life, writing music about my life is one thing, but then also talking to others about it. I don't think I realized what a safe place music was for me. I used to have arguments as an adult with my therapist friends. I would say, well, really, I am my music. And they go, no, 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 you are Tina. Your music is what you do. I said, no, 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 no. And I think I was correct in that the music became a voice and also another world that I kind of lived in. Because when you write, you're writing hours a day and you're kind of immersed in that world. And it was almost like I had two lives. I had the life that took care of my daughter and, cooked and did all those things. But then I had this very intense private life writing my music. And I think even as a young child, I played piano ever since I was 5, that it was a safe place for me to be. When you're practicing, not too many people bother you because they want you to keep on practicing. And it became in college this language, a place where I could express myself freely, and people didn't have to know what it was about necessarily. They could hear the music, Dark Child sings. Yeah, they could hear the music, but they wouldn't really know the backstory. So it really did become a voice and a place of refuge for me.
So do you believe, you talk about the fact they don't know the backstory of your music? Do you believe that music, though, so if a person knew your backstory and then heard the song, their appreciation is going to be greater? Is that what you're getting at? Or do you believe, because I believe music speaks to, and I wrote this down earlier, and I also have a question about it in regards to how music, everybody listens to a song. I've been to concerts before, and we're with, let's say, 5-6 people, and we'll talk about it, and I'll say about a specific part of the concert, and some people will go, and for me, it just like completely resonated with me. I know if I knew the backstory, I'd be more connected to it, obviously, but I think I appreciate it how I need to appreciate it between my 6 inches.
Well, and I have a very sort of fluid feeling about all of this. I think in traditional music, the idea was to always represent the composer as exactly as you can and try to exactly get from them what the music is. For me, it's more of a collaboration. I am going to speak my truth to you, and what I hope is that will resonate in you, something true about you. It's not that I want you to know me. It's I kind of want to, I want you to know you better. And that to me, that's what I love about great art or great literature or any kind of experience, traveling. It's not that I learn about the place that I'm traveling at, but it affects me. It goes into me. It teaches me something about myself or changes something. And to me, that's the magic of whatever artistic endeavor you're doing.
100%.
It's not that you know me, but that you know you
Oh,
better.
absolutely. The interpretation of music, art, like I love going to art galleries and museums. I've been to different ones around the world. I'm heading to Europe in a few weeks, and a lot of our stops are going to be doing stuff like that. I don't always necessarily need to read or hear a guide tell me something without I can feel a connection, right? I can look at something and just have that pause, that connection to my mind, my body, my spirit, my soul, whatever you want to call it. And I can have an emotional response. Sometimes when I read it, I'm disappointed. Right? If that makes
because
sense.
It's more about the technicalities, where they were, what they were doing. And I am somebody who really likes to break down barriers between myself and others. So I'm not that interested in teaching. I'm more interested in sharing. I'm interested in inviting in rather than telling you what to think. And I really do think of this as a collaborative process. So the listener, if you're not listening, my music is just not going to be there in a funny way. So I not only collaborate with the performers when they take my music and they have to make it their own, they have to imbue my music with their own, not only the way they play, but where they are in their lives. And that's a collaboration.
Well, the instrument itself is an emotional extension, and based on who they are, their emotions, their feelings, their angst, their tribulations, trials, their joys, everything comes out. Like one of my favorite instruments is the violin. And I can tell when people are playing the violin. I don't care if it's the same song. I've heard songs that played by the violin, and then all of a sudden that same artist, a performer that's performing that song, it sounds a little bit different. And people go,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's not exactly the same. No, I hear something differently. Maybe it's based on my emotional state, but I also believe that, again, as an extension, they're sharing their emotions, especially with a violin. To me, it's such a
Yeah.
passionate instrument. But anyway, I digress.
I like the cello the best
Do you?
because when you play the cello, you have to open up your legs. You embrace the instrument with
True.
your body, and it actually leans against your sternum. It doesn't really lean against your heart. Let's, oh no, wait a minute. Heart is on the left. Well, yeah, kind of leans here because you're doing your fingering here. So I just think it's the coolest instrument. I love writing for cello. I really do. Yeah. I
Well,
read
that's
a lot for
awesome.
cello.
But, for those listening, you don't see Tina's face, the joy when she's talking about it. So we're all connected emotionally to specific things, whether it's an instrument or whatever it is. And then because you are connected to it and you're writing music for the cello, that passion is there, right?
Yeah.
It's ingrained right within every single note. And I
Right.
honestly believe that people discount music too much, right?
Hmm.
And what it can offer up to them in their lives. It's been a salvation for me. It's been a saving grace. It's been able to pull me out of the lowest lows. And it's not just the music. It's also, I have a close friend of mine that he actually just finished touring Europe. It's his music ability, like the ability for him to write songs, and when he's not singing along with it, he's a folk artist. I can connect to it on all levels. The auditory part of it, as well as the, like, pardon me, not auditory, well, it's all auditory, but his singing voice along with his ability to write the music himself and playing it on a guitar or on a piano, or and he's done concerts in my city at a place called the Winspear Center. If you check it out, it's where the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra plays, and he's done concerts where he's forefront and they're playing with him, the full orchestra.
Wonderful.
Oh, it gets me excited because I've seen it a few times. During the pandemic, everything was closed down, so he started doing street concerts in crescents, on roads. People would pay him and he'd set up. And there was a couple times that he did it that members, 6, 7, 8 members of the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra would come out and they'd set up right on the street with him and play.
Isn't that fun? Isn't
He
that fun?
Oh yeah, he did it over a year and a half, 2 years. He did like 600 street concerts. It was amazing.
Wow.
Sometimes
Wow.
he'd do more than one in the evening. He'd pop all over the place, and he was doing it to obviously make some money to support his wife and kids and himself. But he did it because he knew that people were hurting. Because I've known Martin since he moved here from the UK. He's originally a UK citizen. I've known him since he moved here, and I've been blessed, honestly blessed by the people that have come into my life with their music and their talents and treasures. And the podcast is another thing that's been a blessing for me as well, or I wouldn't be talking to you.
Oh, there you go.
So one of the things, this is going to go back just one step to what we were talking about, because I really want to know what you would give people advice in regards to that secrets thing that we were talking about, because it played a big part of your life. It plays a big part of many people's lives. What advice could you give to others to avoid that same pitfall so they don't get to that point where that secret is controlling their life, or they're, living a facade?
Yeah. I don't have the magic bullet. My guess would be get support. That you really can't do anything alone. And if you can have friends or, therapy or anything like that, where you're not feeling alone. I do think that secrets like my mother kept were born of, a lot of things, but first of all, shame. And I don't know, I think shame is a big bully. It's always like ordering you around. So I can't give shame a lot of credibility. But shame for my mother, she never told anyone. She didn't tell her mother. She didn't tell her best friend. She actually traveled to Sweden. She was caught up a little bit into this romantic notion that she was a fallen woman, out of the great love affair. She was the fallen woman. I think the secrecy, secrets are all about being by yourself. So my guess is that part of the remedy is to be with other people and to start telling your story to someone you trust. And if you don't have anyone you trust, then find somebody you can pay that will hold your secrets and help you. Because I think once you articulate them, they're never quite as scary as they are trapped in your mind.
What has been your journey? Sorry, I'll let you finish that thought too, but I want to know what about finding your biological father was like too. You had
Oh my
mentioned that
goodness,
earlier.
that was a whole nother saga. And
Well,
again,
you don't have to share. I'm just
No, it's
curious because you
fine.
brought
It's
it up
fine.
with the marriage.
Yeah.
You brought it up with the two
Yes.
weddings, right?
Yes.
So
When I was in high school, going to high school, my mother said, "Oh, you have to go away to school. This town is too small. I want you, where do you?" I said, "Oh, I'd love to go to Interlochen and study music." She said, "No, I want you to go down to Philadelphia to this private school, this fancy private school." And I thought, what the heck? But, she just said, "Oh, no, this is such an opportunity. And by the way, there is this family that is old family friend, and they'll look in on you." So I boarded there for a year. And then in 12th grade, my mother said, "This family really would like you to live with them, and it would save a lot of money." And I said, "But who are they?" "Oh, the old family friends." So I lived in my biological father's house with his wife and
wow.
his 4 other little children for a year, and I didn't know it.
Did he know?
Of course, he knew, and his wife knew. And
But how long did he know for? Did he know the whole
he
time that you
knew
were
all
alive?
along. He knew all along that uh, he had been married when my mother became pregnant. But when she came back, he had gotten divorced, and they were thinking of getting married when she went back to Sweden, and that didn't work out. So he'd always known about me, and so I lived in the family, and I would call my mother, and I said, my Mr. and Mrs. Chance just seem to be fighting a lot. My mother would say, "Oh, married couples fight." My mother was very good at sort of avoiding the conversation. She said, "Just make sure you help out." So it was pretty tense there. After the fall was fine, but the spring was very tense. So when I found out that my mother was my biological mother, I put together really quickly that he must be my father. Then it all sort of like, oh,
Lots
my
of
father be?
a lot of manipulation along the whole process. Your mom was, I don't want to use the word, but it's very calculated.
Yeah,
It was
self-protective,
you
always
whatever you want to
self-protective.
call it. It's
Yeah.
self-protective, but she's putting you in circumstances and then not telling you, not even giving you a half truth, just dropping you into circumstances that, yeah, it's interesting, the mind of some people and how they think. It really
Yes.
is,
Right. And she justified it in her mind. Like,
constantly.
oh, yes, constantly.
I don't think there was ever a moment that she wouldn't have been thinking about it and understanding what she was doing. That's why why I say it's calculated, because she would have had to have thought about it. It wouldn't be just an lackluster, "Hey, let's send you to your biological father to live when you're in grade 12." You know what I mean? Like, there was very, very calculated. She must have been communicating with him. I can't even imagine the drama. We can speculate all day long, But bottom line, I just was curious. I bet you the listeners were too. You know,
Yes.
that you
Well,
were
and
connected finally to your biological father, and it was conversations must have been interesting once the it came out of the closet, the secret.
yes. And I think, as I open up my book talking about my daughter when she was born, she was always my great opportunity. I was holding her, and I was in my 30s, and I was thinking, I'm kind of a mess here, and I can give this mess to my daughter, or I can really dig in and do some hard work. I can either hand this whole mess to her, and she'll just, be part of her birthright, my mess, kind of the way my mother's gave me her mess. And I just said, no, I can't do that to her. And that was a great opportunity for me uh, and I worked really hard for many, many years doing therapy and also doing, massage and yoga and whatever you do to heal yourself. And I
As
think
well
it's
as
a
being a composer, right? As well as
right,
doing your composing, and that was one of the
taking
things
care
I
of,
would, yeah,
and then after a while
always,
being a single parent.
yeah.
Um, but I was so deeply angry. I didn't think I was going to make it, if certainly not make it as a whole person. I could make it as a half person. um,
Yeah, it's
and
you've been on quite the journey, that's for sure.
yeah, and all of this was sort of always bleeding off into my music, and into the work I did. So it was really after about 10 years of real hard work and therapy that I was given an opportunity by Meet the Composer to be a composer in residence with an orchestra, an opera company, and a social service organization. And
Holy smokes, what a
my job,
combination.
yes, my job was to rethink how contemporary music could work in community settings. And this was just sort of at the beginning of the music world really starting to decide to go into community and do work in community. And at the YWCA, they had a program for a residential facility for women who were homeless, who had lost their children and their home because of, addictions or abuse, or, not having a job or whatever it was. And I started to think about how I could, as a composer, that maybe the composing process could help them in their healing. So I worked through a parenting program that was to help them become better parents. So when their kids were returned from foster care or wherever they were, they would be better parents. And I started helping them create their own operas of their lives. So they would think of stories of their origin stories, and then they would create their music around this. We were in a kitchen, so we used pots and pans as a drum
That's
circle.
awesome.
And if they were creating songs, we would record them so they would remember them. And then I started going into public schools and also teaching in poorer schools that had no music programs, kids to learn how to write music as a way of defining creativity for them and marking it and saying, look how creative, you just built an instrument out of recycled materials. You just, I have something on here. Let me turn this off. Sorry about that. Hold on a second, and I will put on a do not disturb. So I'd go into these schools, we would make instruments out of recycled materials, and then we would write music using graphic notation. So they would draw the music, and then they reduce the piece of paper. So then they would start to think of invented notation as like, how could I document the change in pitch and maybe how long the pitch lasted? And then they performed them for the schools. And
Awesome.
it was always my interest to use music to show people that we are naturally creative people, and it is your birthright. It's something that belongs to you. And don't let anybody tell you you don't have any creativity, because that's not true. You might have to work on it.
No, it needs to be watered, nurtured.
Yes, but you definitely have it. Like, you have two arms, you have two legs, you have creativity. And I've always wanted people to trust and own their creativity. I feel that it's part of my work as a musician and even an author. If I can make it through, other people can make it through.
Speaking of you being an author, your memoir came your memoir came out, Let Your Heart Be Broken, Life and Music of a Classical Composer, this year. Your book has been described, as we mentioned prior, a lyrical reckoning with what it takes to compose a life of cohesion and beauty out of shattered bits and broken stories. I know writing my book was very cathartic and helped me accept and move on from many things in my past, because my book, like yours, starts out from my origin to where I am today. What was the journey like for you writing the book, as you write a lot about forgiveness, grieving, spiritual connection? And, how has sharing it helped you in your current journey in life?
Well, it's really interesting. I started writing this at the end of my second marriage, and I don't think that was a coincidence. I knew I was going to leave that marriage and basically be homeless. I'd leave the house that I had and my wonderful stepchildren. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like I was trying to pull the bits of my life together to understand them more and to move into this next part of my life. So that was about 10 years ago. I wrote the first draft, and then I put it away for a couple of years, and then I brought it out again. I worked on it, and then I put it away, and then I found these publishers. But I have to say, I think it's been a very important part of this last 10 years being such a calm and wonderful 10 years is, I wanted to be able to articulate for others my artistic process. I think in my field, we don't talk about the artistic process very often. It's almost as if composers are such magical beings that the piece just emerges from our head. But I really wanted to talk about it in terms where anybody could read it and sort of say, oh, I didn't know, rather than technical terms like chords and progressions, and but really talk about it almost in the vernacular. And because I'm always wanting people to love music, or to recognize that classical music, contemporary composers are writing out of tradition, but they are writing out of their lives. It's sort of our experience, like going to an art museum and seeing how artists have their experience and how we have our experience. So that's always important to me. So I think the book really stabilized these last 10 years, and they've been great. They've really been great. I have loved the fact that my creativity, which was so laser focused on music, has kind of spread out a little bit, certainly by writing a book.
So in regards to the book, and I can appreciate everything you're saying, what one or two stories really resonate with you that you put inside your book that could help the listeners or people watching on their own journey? Is there anything that specifically comes to mind that you would like to share?
I will share the opening sort of after the author's note. There's a page like this.
Sure, go for it.
And it's about the title of the book, Let Your Heart Be Broken. And I was, during this process, I was at the Open Center in New York, and I was going to a conference of an author and poet named Stephen Levine. And he had done a lot of work with Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who is sort of the death and dying person. And he had done a lot of work. It was during the AIDS epidemic when Friends, it was sort of our first COVID in a way, a COVID that we don't, I don't know if people realize this is our second really big epidemic where we were frightened and we had friends and loved ones who were dying. So it was a great big conference, and he was sitting on the stage, and he said he was asked by an audience. It says the audience asked, "What is the meaning of life?" And Stephen Levine relaxes back into his chair. "I am asked that all the time," he replies, "and I really don't know." He pauses, looking to the side, turning back, smiling. "But I think the meaning of life is to let your heart be broken." And then I go on and write, "The heart, the round sphere of your being, let your heart be broken. Allow, expect, look forward to the life you have so carefully protected and cared for. Broken, cracked, rent in two, heartbreakingly, your heart breaks. And in the two halves rocking on the table is revealed rich earth, moist, dark soil, ready for a new life to begin."
True. From brokenness comes growth if you choose.
Yes.
But it's a
So,
choice.
And I love the word, let your heart, the verb is so gentle. It's sort of we're all broken. We've all had broken hearts. My mother had a broken heart. But to walk with that brokenness, to learn about it, to accept it, to go through it, to learn from it, to master it, I think that to me that's where new life is always. That's where the new possibility is. And I think that's what my book is all about.
And that's, and our books are powerful tools that we don't necessarily, when we start writing it. I know myself, when I was working with the company and I was sending things off to the editor, I'd read something and I'd get it back from the editor, and I'd read something and I feel differently about it because I start reading things out loud so I could actually hear it, not just hear it in my brain, but actually hear it, me saying it. And I thought to myself, well, how is this going to help other people? Right? Obviously, this is about me, my journey, and it's heartfelt, but am I articulating it the right way? So the whole journey of the book, I kept on thinking, I need to make it so that this is easy for somebody that is hurting or looking, maybe they're not hurting, but they're stuck on a hamster wheel of life. They don't know how to get off of it, but it's easy enough for them to read where it's not going to be, oh, I got too much going on, and toss the book down. I don't know if you thought about that, but throughout the whole process, I was thinking, I got to make this. And my publisher kept on saying, yeah, make it about a grade 8 level, right? Or you're going to lose people. Don't be too specific about your wording. Like, don't get, like in Canada, they talk about university or college people use $20 words. Everything's a word that nobody understands, right?
Oh,
don't be using those $20 words.
I have to say, my mother and stepfather were literature professors, so I'm always using those. And when I'm teaching, every once in a while, I'll say a word will fly out of my mouth, and there's this blank look. And I said, oh, it's a good SAT test for when you have to take that qualifying test for college. This, I'm going to write it down. You got to learn this word. Well, I think I got one of the best pieces of advice. A friend of mine is a very famous author, Mary Gordon. She's a really well-known author, and she read the draft of the book, and her advice to me was, make sure you are on every page. And I thought, well, that sounds really kind of narcissistic. But I went through my book at that point, and anytime that I felt I was lecturing to the reader, like, you should do this, or you should, third person, it's got to be about me. This is what I have learned. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what I did for myself. And I think that that's perhaps what speaks the truest, is when we're just honest and look, this, I don't know what you're doing in your life, but this is how I solved this problem. This is what I've learned. And then the reader has permission to take what they want to from it. And some of the best, friends, or I just was interviewed by someone out in, I think in Southern California. And one of the things that she said is that I write in a way that gives enough space for the reader to make up their own mind.
That's
and
awesome.
I thought that was such a wonderful compliment.
It is.
So when I'm writing about my mother and my stepfather, I talk about the difficulty in relationship, but I also don't want to throw them under the bus. I don't want to call them names because people are such complex entities, and they may have done something not very worthy over here, but they've done all this other very worthy thing. And I would always want people in my life to be looked at through all of that rather than just the one. And that we can approach them with compassion. I think the choices that my mother made for herself were very consequential and sad. They created a lot of sadness. And so if I'm going to continue, I want to make sure that what I choose to do is thoughtful and not going to hurt others.
Of course, I can appreciate that. Too many people in life don't worry about the consequences of their actions and words, and they're very self-evolved. They're not, they're all about them. And I appreciate what you can say, you say about your mom and what she was going through. And at the end of the day, empathy is a powerful tool to healing as well, right? Most people don't realize it, right?
Yes.
Empathy, as an empath myself, which was brought to my attention really predominantly. I've had her on my show twice, an empath coach, right? So, and I've researched empathy a lot to understand, because I was a single dad of 5 kids. They're all adults now, and understanding why I was picking up and feeling this way. And I was like a human antenna picking up the signals, especially when I have 4 daughters of the 5 kids are girls, right? So I appreciate you sharing. One of the things I wanted to ask you, though, was you wrote very profoundly about love. Marked by absence, I was, in the end, found by love. Please explain the story behind this statement.
Oh, boy. I think one of the things that I was so surprised about was that my foster mother had always loved me, and that somehow I knew that, and it was transmitted to me. When I got back in touch with the family, my mother didn't have any more contacts. She said, I don't have a contact. So I actually went to the international operator, and she gave me this name of, it turned out to be the 4th child that was born a year after I had left. And I called, when he answered the phone, I said, I'm Tina Davidson from America. I used to live with you. And he said, I have always heard about you. So they told stories about me. I was part of their family. stories, their history. And then when I visited them, at one of the dinners I was at, the daughter-in-law of one of the four boys came, and she had this little tiny box, and I opened it up, and she said, "Oh, Solveig gave this to me." And it were these two tiny little dresses that had belonged to me that Solveig had kept for all those years. So, marked by absence, there was always this love that was there. And I think about that, that sometimes we feel really disconnected, or sometimes we lose someone. And we grieve that. But I think once you get through that grief, you can again feel the strength of that love. And it's nourishing. It's not like it nourished you then, but it continues to nourish you. So I always thought that was really amazing, that I had, even with so much absence, that I had lost her. I profoundly felt that love and that care that she had for me. And I do think, sometimes I think we don't give the foster family enough credit. I think foster family is a little bit like stepmother, where there's like a bad rap about the word, the evil stepmother, the Cinderella's stepmother. And then foster parents, a lot of foster parents have done bad things, but they by no means are, they're a tiny percentage of the foster parents who love their foster kids, totally bring those children into their heart and treat them equally with the other children in the household. And that bond is very strong and very important.
And of course it is. But when you talked about the fact of, people thinking foster homes are bad, well, let's talk about the media. The media in general, though, they highlight and accentuate things that are going to sell advertising, and it's always based on angst and anger and, trials and tribulations that are very negative. So they're not going to showcase stories about foster homes that are uplifting and very thoughtful about what the foster system is like.
Yes.
The media takes everything in the smallest portion of negativity, and then people listen that, those listening or watching, if you live your life around the media, you're hurting yourself. There's a very small portion of the media that's not controlled by one faction or another, right? There's only two factions that own all the media outlets in North America. So if they're saying something negative about anything like foster care, take it with a giant grain of salt. And maybe if it's affecting your life, if you're a person that, and this is, some people don't like this because I've had messages, I will always believe that if you live your life where you have to watch the morning, middle of the day, evening, and even bedtime news like my parents do, which is unbelievable. And then when I have conversations, they're in their 80s, their whole life is focused around that. Stop. There's, just live your life for the circle of people you have around you. Guess what? If something is traumatizing or bad enough that you need to know, somebody's going to tell you. I stopped getting the newspaper in about approximately 1989. I stopped watching news and media around the same time. The media I focus on now is in regards to business news because of my finance industry. And then I have other news that I follow in regards to, what's going on with the economy and stuff like that. Because again, tied to my business, but I can't do anything about somebody that's been murdered in the US or in Canada or et cetera. Now, obviously, I have a compassionate, empathetic heart, but is it feeding me the right way to know all that information? And if it's something that's central to my local community, people are going to tell me that do listen to the news or read the newspaper or do whatever. I think we need to, as a society, realize that don't label the foster industry based on the media. Don't label anything based on the media, because all they're doing is trying to sell you an advertisement to go buy a car or go get, go get this new potato chip, whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, and I totally am on the same page with you about the news. I prefer reading it. I think that when people are on TV, they put so much emotion into it, and if you are empathetic, it's going to soak in. When I moved to this house, I told all my kids that I had buried a magical, imaginary electric fence around the property. It's called a drama-free zone. So if they come with the drama, like, oh, I've got to tell her about all this bad stuff, they go, oh, how come I can't go any further? Because it's not that I don't care about, I want to hear what's going on for you, and I want to hear the dark stuff and the difficult stuff. But the ain't it awful, oh my God.
It's the presentation. It's the presentation.
Absolutely. And I think, getting back to this quote, it's also, what are you going to focus on? I could spend a life of focusing on what my mother did to me. We could say that would be kind of victim-y. But there's subtle ways of doing that as well. Or I could take the small little beautiful things that I've learned and hold on to them. And I write as I look back, it is not the darkness I fell out of, but the love that remains that is remarkable. The sieve of my life has a magical backwardness to it. This mesh allows all the great big rough clumps of dirt and stones to fall through, while the fine, rich, and startling beautiful small stones, wet and glistening from the river of life, remain caught in the filaments. So I think sometimes all the nonsense goes through my sieve. It's like this sieve is really magical. It's got all these great big holes, but it will catch the wonderful little tiny beautiful things that we can hold on to and that are life affirming and that can give us a deeper sense of meaning, where the big stuff is muddy and dirty and it gets us wet and cold and but if I want to hold on to something that will give me energy to move forward, to interact with community in the way that I want to, it is those small, amazing little pieces of love.
Yeah, I like how you explain that. Of course, at the end of the day, we can come out of trials and tribulations. And again, it's like you're saying, what are you going to decide to hang on to? Well, love is a great thing to hang on to, right? Mm-hmm. It's too much of our society around the world today. My whole life, there's never not been a war going on somewhere, because it's always focused on control and angst. It's not focused on love and compassion. And the people that suffer the most are the citizens of any country or any community, because of the fact that everybody around them is focusing on hanging on to the negativity of everything from their origin, and then it spills out and people want to control your opinion of the narrative of what's going on. And it's just focus on love. My core values are simple. They have been since I was a kid, and I've stuck by them, and I get questioned on them, criticized, sometimes, very supported about it. But my 3 core values in order are faith, family, and work. And they've always been that. Work isn't my priority. My faith and my family are, and the love for both of them. It doesn't mean I don't love my work, but my work isn't controlling the narrative of the other two. It is there for me to serve humankind. It's there for me to make a difference as a servant. I believe God gave me the talent to do what I do, to help people out of angst, to help them out of their hamster wheel environment of life, because I don't just coach on finance. I do a lot of lifestyle coaching. And focus on love, focus on the good. Yeah, quit always thinking about it. I like your drama-free fence around your home. I have a couple of my
It's caught.
kids. Oh, I have a couple of my kids that love them to pieces, but yeah, they're extremely, everything's drama. And it's not that I don't want to hear it, like you were saying, it's presentation.
Right,
Why do you
right.
have to say it that way? Why don't
Hmm.
you know, you need to learn how to communicate. Part of the response of us reacting to people, what they say is how they say it. Wordsmithing is important. As we talked about the $20 word, wordsmithing is important. We
Right,
need to be
right.
relatable to people.
I wanted to share with you what you said, what your core values are. There is a Shaker quote. And of course, the Shakers had the idealistic community in America where men and women would live in harmony but not reproduce. They didn't believe in marriage or sex or anything. And it was a very idealistic community, and they created beautiful objects. The Shaker art crafts are just amazing. But their saying is hands to work, hearts to God. Now, I don't happen to believe in God, but I do feel a large connection to something other than myself. I don't care what you call it, God, higher power, doesn't matter. Hands to work, hearts to God. And I kind of put those together, that in everything you do, there is that sense of God in it, of 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 purpose that is higher, that has. So whether you're at picking up the trash on your street, or teaching, or writing music, or doing your podcasts, there are both of those, that the hearts to God is sort of part of the hands to work. And then that takes a lot of time, because you have to be thoughtful and present about it. You have to be intentional. And so you can't do as many things. You may be able to pick up the trash only on your street, but not all over the world, because you have other things to do. But I love that sense of that everything you do has a holiness to it, whether it's work or taking care of your kids or trash or whatever. And so that's hands to work, hearts to God is something that I really love and resonate with.
Ties directly to kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you pick up a piece of trash in your neighborhood, it's kindness to your community. It's kindness to the environment. It's purposeful.
Yes.
People constantly say to me, well, what's one message you would focus on always telling people from your youngest age to now? Be kind in everything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That old phrase, kill them with kindness, is so overused because people don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get what that's,
Mm-hmm.
if I live a life of being kind in everything that I do, and it's focused on love of others, not love of things, right? Things can
Mm-hmm.
help us, they can give us joy, but they don't give us, to me, they don't give purpose. So I focus on kindness, which for me ties right to love, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I get
No.
back what I sow. And do I always? No, but I
Yeah.
get enough. I get enough because I understand how to control my situations of associations of what I watch, listen to, who I hang out with, right? I'm kind to those that are kind back. It's not 100% of the time. Life is not perfect. This is, life is in session. This is not a dress rehearsal. I'm going to work on me and continue to evolve the rest of my life. And yeah, kindness rules. Love is great. All right.
Yes. Yes, I would agree.
So
Yeah.
Tina, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
Never giving up. Giving a heck and never giving up. Boy, I think I would boy, I'm caught between sharing your joy and dare to create yourself anew. I think I'll stick with dare to create yourself anew. That, heartbreak and failure, loss, being sidelined, these are all conditions of life. You're not special. But I think the willingness to step through these things, not avoid them, not try to go around them, not try to hide them, but to live with them and step through them. It just offers so much opportunity for the next step, whatever that step is. So, I always say that I have lots of skeletons in my closet, but I keep them well managed. So every once in a while they escape and they clunk around and I go, hey, buddy, what are you doing? So I'm not a believer that you can erase things from your life, bad things. But you can learn to live with them with humor and joy and purpose. And, they're always going to crop up at some point, it's, but now how to do it. And you notice I said, hey, buddy, I didn't yell at it or be horrified. It's just like, oh gosh, there you are again. How can I get you back? What's going on with you? And sometimes that skeleton has something important to say to me, like, I'm scared. I'm worried. I think you're going to ruin our life. And I'll say, yeah, I know you're scared. And don't worry, I have this in hand. I'm working on it. I've got good resources. I'm not going out on my own, I'm not flying off a cliff. I've got a good support system here. So you can go back and hang out with your buddies, your other skeleton buddies.
Well, you're choosing what energy to give those skeletons, right? And how you interpret things. And that's great. Thank you for that last closing message. So our time is almost up. I want to respect our listeners and your time. However, before we end, can you please tell the listeners what's the best way to reach you?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I think it's Tina Davidson. Either I have a private and a professional page, and I'm on Instagram. My website, tinadavidson.com. You can buy my book on Amazon, Let Your Heart Be Broken, Life and Music from a Classical Composer. Yeah, I'm around. Just Google my name, you'll find me.
Yeah, I'll make sure all this information goes into the show notes. For those new to the show, you can go to giveaheck.com. That's giveaheck.com. Hit the portal button for the podcast. You'll see a picture of Tina, and below that, you'll see abbreviated show notes, which will include links to her social media, her website, so that you can easily reach out to her. I appreciate you being on. Any last final comments that you'd like to say before I wrap up the show?
No, it's just been such a pleasure talking to you and having this conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to invest your precious time in sharing with my audience and myself. So thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Tina. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it is never too late to give a heck.
Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.